Hello and welcome to the Dealmaking panel. My name's Melissa Lewis, and we have a fabulous panel here to share their expertise and wisdom. And the panel will briefly introduce themselves in a moment. But first, we wanted to make sure that all of our comments are in context with you. So, and to minimize, we're not going to give our bios so that you can get more time with information. So please refer to that lovely digital Hollywood book and website to find all of our bios. And good luck. No, just kidding. So we can target our comments to you. By show of hands, how many of you are content creators? Alrighty. Talent and influencers. Nobody? Gee, that's a surprise.
There was one.
Oh, three.
Oh, I'm glad you guys have better eyes. Industry executives, lawyers, business affairs, and financing people? All right, then we can speak freely. No. Oh, there's you.
I want to meet you.
Yeah. So thank you. And we're going to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions. And just a caveat, at 1 o'clock they throw us out on the button because there's another panel that starts at that time. So panel, welcome, and can you please briefly introduce yourselves? And while you're doing that, if you can throw in what type of deals each of your companies do, and anything you want to throw in about your typical deal-making process. That's a lot, so.
Go ahead.
All right, I'll
Linda?
start. Hi, I'm Linda Benjamin. I'm head of business affairs and COO at Covert Media. And we are an independent finance production distribution company. We do movies and television. And the deals that we do run the gamut from acquisitions of properties to all the deals developing those properties. We deal with studios, we deal with financiers, we raise money, we put them together. We have a foreign sales entity that sells foreign rights for some of our properties, not all of them. And so, and we do a lot of merchandising and consumer products and things like that. So it's really pretty much everything you can do with a piece of intellectual property is something that might come across my desk.
That's a lot. Good job.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Justin, and I am a universe builder. I start with a spark of something, a piece of intellectual property, which could be a piece of talent, brand, anything you can think of, an idea. And I then start thinking about, if you were going to build a universe out of this one step at a time, how would you do that? What deals would you need to make at its inception, at the big bang of it all, to lead you in success, not to just some lame back-end participation in EP fee, but to actually own rights that outsmart Goliath when you are David. And I deal with talent, brands, every distribution platform there is, feature film, Broadway, TV, award shows, and any way you can monetize it. And each one of those has its own language and its own precedents. And just like there are a million ways to tell a story or write a poem, there's a million ways to actually make a deal. And each one of those requires me to be a little bit more creative and a little more ahead of the step, because I'm not a big company, I'm not financed by hundreds of millions of dollars. So what we rely upon is our ability to think through the problem and figure out where the weakness is in a creative way, as opposed to a highly leveraged, more powerful way.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Daryl Miller. I'm the chair of the entertainment department of Fox Rothschild. It's a national law firm based out of Philly. We have 27 offices around the country, and I'm based in the LA office. I often call us a firm within a firm because our competitors and a lot of the firms that we operate with are the boutique entertainment firms. So we are true entertainment deal makers, if you will. But we also have litigators that do IP and high-end defamation work. From a deal-making standpoint, that's what I do. I'm particularly a trained film and television lawyer that also does a lot of branding and work with a number of, from acting, writing, directing, producer, production company, and a few executives as well. So the deal-making process for me is something we breathe and eat, and I have to say, we probably like Justin, we're probably universal deal makers, and that we
Did you just pilfer my IP? I did not license it to you, but it will cost you.
Good thing I'm a lawyer. I can defend myself on an infringement claim.
Okay. This could get expensive, though.
We'll have more lawsuits before the panel is
But
over, I'm sure.
Exactly. It's great to be here. But there's immunity. This is a safe ground.
There's nothing safe about it when you're taking things from other people, my friend.
Very good.
Hi everyone, it looks like it's going to be exciting. And my name is Efe Akbulut, and I am heading the analytics team at BritBox, which is a streaming service by BBC and ITV. And so I could say like I am from BritBox, but my accent is coming from Istanbul. And also I'm so excited to bring more like analytics perspective. If I need to think about what kind of deals we make at BBC and ITV as a BritBox, I mean, we make many different kind of deals, like acquisition, like content choices. But as my department, I am always trying to give a good way to the other teams to make them data-driven. So
On a side note, generalizing madly about an entire nation, you have to admit that the Turkish are some of the best deal makers in the world.
Thank you.
Well, that was quick, so I have to take a breath. I'm John Allen Simon, and my company is Discovery Productions, Inc., which is really just my wife, Elizabeth Carr, and myself. You know, like those animals that have vestigial organs, we've done lots of things, and we still keep our hand in many of them. What we are primarily I'm a writer and producer who's worked at the indie and studio level. But we've also been distributors, and at the moment we're restoring a movie that we own, which is Dennis Hopper's Out of the Blue, and we're going to be doing a re-release of that. I was also producer's rep, so we advise other filmmakers. We're great believers in controlling our own content. We own over 300 novels and stories by famous writers like Philip K. Dick and Jim Thompson. We've just set up a project that of Pop 1280 with Yorgos Lanthimos attached to direct. And I've directed a feature from a Philip K. Dick book at a very modest budget level. That's really my passion, is to do very small movies. We've just acquired the rights to a John Hersey book that we're going to do as a really small budget movie. And basically we like to find content that other people have neglected. We distributed The Wicker Man, which some of you might be old enough to remember. We rescued off the shelf. And you know, we do lots of things. Since I'm a writer, I like to avoid writing. So we have lots of things we try to do.
Thank you. To start off, is there anything, we'll just jump right into the nuts and bolts, is there anything that people should do before, during, or after a negotiation starts?
Wash their hands.
Get a lawyer.
Well, doesn't Sun Tzu say in the art of war that every battle is won before it's fought?
I believe
Yes.
so. I read that about 25 years ago.
Yes, a famous quote also from Wall Street. But yet, right, so, I mean, much of a negotiation in many senses is knowing a lot and positioning yourself to be in a better position than the other person is before you even engage with them, right?
What sort of preparation in your area would you recommend that people do?
Well, I think it's like anything, right? I mean, you wouldn't walk into a job interview without Googling somebody, right? I mean, so, I mean, you know, if they found that out, they'd probably just ding you right there. So, I mean, as you think about a negotiation, you need to think about what it is that you want and what it is, you know, most people don't really know what they really want. They say they want a set of rights or they want more money. But like, you really need to understand what it is that you want and stack rank what it is in what priority you want it, right? I mean, everything is not equal. You might care about back end and not fees. You might care about credit and not, you know, not back end because you're never going to see it. So that's part of your preparation for you. And then there's the preparation on the other side. What do you think they're going to most want? Do you know anybody who's ever worked with them? What's the precedent that you know you can get? These are things that are not publicly available, but if you work your network, you can walk into this negotiation and know a lot more information than just simply saying, you know, if you go and say, I want 100, and they say they want 1, and you end up at 50, you're not really negotiating. You're not really giving yourself an advantage. So like anything else, if you want to lose weight, you got to go to the gym. If you want to negotiate, you got to put in the work.
You know, I think the model of, you know, want, need, and walk is the right one, that you probably won't get what you want, but you have to know what it is going in. You know, what you need, you really can't go too much below. So you want the deal to end between what you really need and what you want, and you have to know the point at which you're willing to walk. I mean, knowing what you want is really one of the big secrets of life. A great negotiator who I interviewed once, Brian Walton, was the negotiator for, I think it was either the Writers Guild or the DGA. He did it for both. And he stood up when the writers and the directors were fighting with the MPAA and pounded on the table and said, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you get what you need. And everyone laughed, and of course, recognizing Jagger Richards at work, and you know, it proceeded. But that really is the point. You have to detach emotions.
Not just knowing what you want, but knowing why you want it. Because a lot of times what you think you want, you actually don't. Or you might want it, but you don't actually need it. What purpose are you trying to achieve? If you really need control, for example, I need control because I am beholden to somebody else, or because my last experience with this organization is they took it away from me, or you know, other reasons. But you drill down to why you want something, and then that's when you get the essential driving force in that negotiation. Because a lot of times there are a lot of ways to achieve that goal, and it's not necessarily what you first thought you wanted.
Also, I am agree with Simon, like you really need to put your hand on the table, definitely. But also like another way to put your hand on the table, put numbers. Because when you go with your numbers, when you make a good, create a data-driven insight, because at the end of the deal meetings, it ends sometimes like, oh, you are right, but there's something. And then you could answer these buts with the data, and then you can show them how much your deal is really important, and you can really get what you need.
So, go ahead.
No, I'm gonna take it in another direction. I think even before knowing what you want and knowing what you need is really understanding for yourself and the team that's negotiating what your leverage points are. Because I think most don't really get to the same page on understanding, really digging down on what the leverage to get what you want and what you need.
So for example, if
All
you've
about
got the
leverage.
talent or you've got the IP.
Or if you've got something that's...
It's not all about the
if
leverage.
If you've got something
It's
with
no
unique-
way it's all about the leverage.
Well, going in, understanding your leverage helps you
Yeah,
get what
absolutely.
you want. It's not all about your leverage, it's not all about the wants, but understanding or the lack of understanding of your ability to have leverage in a deal can severely impact your ability
Is
to
there
win that
always
negotiation.
leverage?
Hold on a second. I would say if you have that, that's nice. But I would say there is the difference between someone who works in a very large firm that already starts with a platform to start with leverage. The truth of the matter is, I would bet most of you out there perceive yourself to have very little to no leverage in most situations, right? So the question is, you don't start with, you're not a studio, you're not a financier, you don't own the IP rights, you're trying to acquire those things. So most of your time, you're not gonna have perceived typical power leverage in this industry. So the question is, you've gotta create, how do you create that leverage, right? So understanding it is got to be, for you guys, it's going to be very different than someone of his magnitude who probably has a lot of leverage, has a large law firm, has a lot of resources. So as entrepreneurs, which most of you seem to be, it's the question of how do you create leverage out of absolutely no leverage? That's the magic you have to figure out.
I agree. Mostly we're in a position where people are telling us, even if we own the IP, Even if we're necessary to the thing, you know, you'll never work in this town again unless you make a deal. You know, it's brutal. It really is. And, you know, you have to keep your dignity in as part of it, you know, because once you get pushed around by the schoolyard bully and give him your lunch money, that isn't the end of it. But you also know how have to gracefully navigate those waters, particularly if you're dealing with studios and major agencies and people who do have much more leverage. But you know, part of that, I guess, I agree with you that you know, you do have to remain aware of your value and worth in the process and what you're offering.
Yeah, yes, let's be clear. Leverage is not a hammer, you know, and a size. Leverage is really that which you believe can help you make the points that you're trying to achieve clear to the other side. I'm from a big firm, but I represent a lot of people starting out and really small people who get rolled over and ultimately are so scared to ask for anything. They tell me, just don't ruin the deal, just get it done. So we're often on that side. I represent a lot of talent, a lot of people getting in the business, and what I call a lot of first generational wealth, which is actually fun. Because in that scenario, the idea of understanding your leverage is knowing what the other side wants from you and what you want from them. That's not a function of, you know, how much muscle you have. That's a function of understanding how to make a deal. And so the leverage points, you know, for an artist who's starting out, if they're walking in a room and they're testing with 4 people, I might ultimately find out the leverage point is that all the executive loves my client. And I've discovered that, as opposed to bowing it over and assuming that because of my size, they're going to give me everything I want. Leverage is understanding that you have that one unique thing that big company wants, and all the money in the world can't get it because there's 10 bidders, and you have the leverage to decide who you go with.
But that is such a rare situation. I mean, like the ability to know, I mean, isn't that why they do for casting? They make you sign your contract before you go in for your final testing. They know that. They've been doing that for decades, right? So I'm not disputing that finding some way to create value for yourself, but sure, if you have 10 bidders, somebody who can't my 8-year-old could make that deal, right? Because it's 10 bidders and everybody wants it. The question for you guys, who are rarely going to ever be in that situation, is how do you create an advantage for yourself when you don't have multiple bidders, when you don't even know the precedent. At least you start with 100 years of 1,000 deals of precedents. These people won't have any of those resources. How do you create that for them?
Can any of you offer some examples of times when you feel that you've created leverage for one of your clients, and maybe an area where it was not as strong as you perceived?
I'll give an example. I'm an independent producer. I don't have any backing from any notable source. I never pay for rights. And I believe in the following philosophy, which has helped me, which I will give to you. Nature's strongest structure physically is a triangle. That's why the pyramids still exist and the aqueducts of Rome have fallen apart. So how do you create leverage? You start by building 3 sides of a pyramid. So I have a deal in TV. I will extract the names because it's not important and it's not public. I wanted to make a TV series at this TV studio, one of the top TV studios. I perceived that they missed the boat in terms of a trend that was happening. And I went to the president of the studio and said, you don't have this IP, you're missing out. I can deliver IP. And this IP was based on video games, which, not a famous video game that you know now, but an old school video game, which doesn't have any story or any characters. Not top-notch thing. It's not Ready Player One, it's not Halo, it's something that's been around that any one of you could have figured out. I didn't know anybody who owned this IP, but I perceived I could make it valuable. I called the head of the studio and said, if I can get you this IP, will you cut XYZ deal? I called the head of the IP holder and said, if I can get you this deal at the studio, will you make XYZ deal? And the deal I suggested elevated the entire concept. So instead of buying 1 show, they were going to buy 3. So it became more attractive for one side. And instead of just giving
a sort of passive agreement. I made the studio say, if they're going to give you all this stuff and they're going to give it to you at a discount, will you also fund it in a certain way? So I structured a deal where I went to both sides and kept them, telling them that I actually had something, when I had neither something. I just had a relationship. And at the end, I ended up putting together the three sides of the triangle that ended up getting the deal done. And what was I? I was the producer. And what's the producer? They're the host of the party. They kept the glue together that made this valuable to both sides, and I bridged the gap, and I made sure I stayed in the middle of it. And as a result, as a non-writing executive producer, I ended up getting a pretty good deal myself. So find the thing that you can bounce off of one another until you can get something. That's one way to do it.
I think you always need a plan B. I mean, that's really been a little bit when we've been the most successful, which is sometimes it can be another bidder. And I think part of the art of negotiation is being in a position to be able to pivot very quickly from one deal to another deal on the same property or your same services in a way that's not covert. Sorry to use that word. That's not covert, but nonetheless allows you to have that. Everyone knows you have that ability. When I was a producer's rep, I still had the ability to distribute films. So we could go to a New Line or other independent distributors and get a bid and say, look, what you want to pay us isn't what the ancillary rights are worth. We'll put it out ourselves if you don't want to buy it. So that was the plan B there. The plan B can also be knowing that you're able to find other talent, that you don't have to have the deal. That desperation, the other side can always smell, and it will always do you in so that you get that walkaway point. And then you've really lost the negotiation. You've made the deal, but if you see negotiation as a game and an art form, when you're beaten down to the point at which 1 cent lower or one thing lower, I'm going to walk away, in essence, you've lost the negotiation because they bought it at the lowest possible price rather than above your walkaway point.
Switching gears a wee bit, is there any type of a deal that you've seen that people should not make in your various areas?
One that you can't live with. I mean, ultimately you can only know where your threshold is, to his point earlier. Here's what I would say to answer that question in conjunction with that last statement, which is the best way for someone in your position probably to have a plan B is to have multiple things going on, because if you're only working on one project, then it means too much to you. It's very difficult to feel like you've got a best alternate to a negotiated agreement or your BATNA. You can't walk away. So, the ability to walk away means you have to have something else to walk away to. So try and be doing multiple things at the same time, and then you won't find yourself in a situation that you regret being in.
Did the analytics help in any way with that, F.A.?
Yeah, definitely, because
can you explain how your analytics work? I understand what analytics are, but how does
definitely I can. For this situation, my suggestion could be we should get prepared before going to the deal making. So you, as a B plan, as we talk, you should come up with your potential maybe weak point the other person can ask you, and you can use analytics in this situation. I can give an example. For BritBox, we are 2 years old, and we have more than 500,000 subscribers, but there could be at the beginning some biases about BritBox, like, oh, you guys got all the subscribers, but because you're British contents, probably all your subscribers coming from New York, LA side, so how you can describe yourself really like you're in the American market? And for this, we make an analytical research, and what we calculate, we look to how many subscribers we have in each city. Of course, we saw New York and LA is the number 1 and 2 because they are high population places. But in the second round, we calculate average streaming minutes per person. And it was a different story we faced with. We saw that in the middle American regions, watch for twice as long as user in New York City. So when we go to the deal, when someone tells us, oh, you are just limited to city areas, Yes, we have so many subscribers in city areas, but we have the real fans in the Middle American regions also. They consume us so much. Even we are British content, we have a taste each corner of the United States. This could be an example.
Yeah, Efe, you're the great professional and also great, real professional analytics. We did something, without that skill set in a negotiation with Netflix for a producer that was similarly using analytics that we just found on the internet.
Can you describe it a wee bit for us?
In that context, and again, this all to me comes back to leverage. In that context, Netflix doesn't give you ratings, right? And so that basically you have no way of knowing how good or bad. They tell you what they tell you and you don't really know. And in our effort to understand our leverage points in a producer where we were renegotiating, we went out and did a bunch of analytical information about all the digital data around our show. And so we came in and showed that 100 million people had actually looked at our show over a period of time. We came in and showed that it was the most engaged digital show within the network after one of their top shows. And we did our own version of kind of presenting a number of analytics to the other side after we planned and understood those numbers before we went in to even begin to negotiate, which turned into one of the biggest negotiations of last year for us.
And I'm super sure, as I mentioned before, when you put the number on the table, people should be agree with you.
They have to, right? Because the one thing we can have, right? We love some of the big streamers. They get away with saying, we'll tell you what, how successful we are. And if you really think about it, they live in the ecosystem of digital analytics. So there's other ways to find out where they sit, even if they're not the traditional ratings that we all have, kind of lived with for most of our careers.
How do you get around Netflix being a black box for viewership? I'm not sure I understand.
I'm not sure what you mean by black box for viewership.
Well, meaning you don't know how many people watched your show.
Well, you change the measure. The measure, again, we all grew up on ratings, how many people are watching. Yeah. But if the new measure becomes how many people are engaged by the objective analytics, you can find out how many people are going to the sites, how many people are downloading, information, and how many people are chatting in rooms, how many people are on social media platforms around your content. You change the game and you change the narrative from the ratings, which they can hide because you won't get, to the things that are objectively able to get because guys like FA.
And also, I want to
there's other ways to show value. So, finding whether it's finding the analytics or other things that you can do to show value. For example, we were dealing with a piece of IP that it was a book, and although it was a little bit older, we were able to show that it sold X number of millions of copies in this country between this period and that period. Things like that can show the value that you're bringing so that you're not just relying on, it's a name or it's a no-name product. Also, listen to the other side when you're engaging with them in a negotiation because you might discover other leverage points. Don't be so tunnel vision in your negotiation that you're not listening to them tell you where you have leverage. For example, if they say, gosh, I really don't, I like this character, but I'm not sure I love the script. Think about that. What is it about that character? Is it something that if you had cast for that character, would that drive it? Would that make it strong enough? Would it increase your leverage? Or they talk about challenges that they're having with something else. So there are all these subtle clues that the other side will give you. And you need to be very aware and facile during that process so that you might come in not thinking that you have a lot of leverage and discover that you actually do because you have something else that they want.
Just to pay Daryl credit, I think that's a very good strategy, and I think actually a more effective strategy than knowing the ratings, especially as it becomes to the streamers who hide the ratings, because if anybody, you may have seen, but most of what the ratings are on services like Netflix are not very impressive. I mean, of course, there are certain things that get very high ratings, but I've seen ratings from Netflix. And some of the top-rated shows might be getting, in any concurrent view over 3 days, 500,000 viewers. And it might be the #1 rated show. And so part of what they're doing is creating the illusion of Oz. And so
their rating, because they're not in the ratings business, they're in the retention business, and they just need to have enough people watch enough of their shows anywhere in any country to stay. So what you did was outmaneuver them, because who cares what the ratings are? What you care about is what the other things, and so because their ratings don't really matter in many of the instances of many of the shows. You know, you could be talking about less than a couple 100,000 people, and it still could be win an Emmy, right? No one knows.
I want to give an interesting information about ratings. In the United States, they create ratings based on a sample data, because the mentality is coming from you couldn't talk with each person, so they collect sample people and they create the ratings. And the United States sample data number is 40,000. It's really small.
That's nothing.
Like
That
how
is
you can make an
ridiculous.
assumption based on 40,000 people watching behaviors, and you say like, oh, I'm in #1 in the ratings. So what does exactly this means?
Maybe
especially in the new data
Well,
era.
that's statistically relevant, right? So it's not, I mean, isn't that just the way
But
it
nowadays,
works?
don't you think maybe that's why people look at social media and followers and things of that nature more?
And the poor man's way of trying to do these kinds of analytics is on Netflix or on Amazon is to look at the number of reviews and ratings, because they will kind of correlate to the popularity. If you assume, you know, that probably on average 1 out of 10, 20, whatever it is, are going to take the time to rate a review, then you can kind of create a hierarchy. This show or this movie had, 1,000 reviews. This one has 300. Probably it's about 3 times more viewed.
Let's go further down the negotiation process or deal-making process tunnel, whatever it would be called. Are there any tips that you can give people on how to have a no turn into a yes, or any examples you can give?
Say no a lot. No, the power of no. I talk a lot about the power of no. Some of the best deals that I've ever done have been preceded by a lot of no. No, not enough, no. Thank you very much, no. And really, again, if you know how badly the other person wants what you have, and you have the confidence to say no and not lose the deal, and sometimes you have to be prepared to walk away from the deal, no has really been a powerful weapon in the negotiation for us.
And you only need one yes. That's the thing to always remember. That's the light at the end of the tunnel, which is that, 925 buyers can reject it, and if the 926th, wants it, you've succeeded. Although maybe you should have found something else in the interim to have tried to work on. And also that you can go at various stages. When I was a producer's rep, I had a partner who was more experienced than I, and he would always tell filmmakers, you have to know what price you want to sell at, and sometimes selling the sizzle is better than selling the steak. So if that price comes in when it's just a title and a concept poster, sell it then. Be alert to the idea that, once you've finished something, you may be in a position where you have no leverage. And in fact, you probably will be in today's market if you're talking about an independent film. So you have to be prepared to know what will work and to be able to take that deal and be checking in every step of the way. They don't like the script, or, you can come back to them when you have a director. They don't like they kind of like it a little more now. Try to get, some talent attached, or better yet, have them help you get talent attached. So a no is never a final no in this business, because if Steven Spielberg wants to do your script, suddenly everybody loves it,
And they all loved it from the beginning, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, but sometimes no is also the best thing you can hear. And this is something that is often learned in hindsight. But if somebody says no, and they say no a lot and vociferously, and it really feels like a no, don't keep pounding your head against the same wall. It's a signal that you need to sometimes change your tactic or find a different party. Because if somebody's saying no and you push and push and push and ultimately it's a reluctant deal, then your project can just get shelved And it can sit there and nothing will happen with it. And you're like, well, gosh, they made this deal with me, but it was a really hard deal. They didn't pay a lot. They didn't seem to really care. That's probably a deal you don't actually want to make because it really stops your creative process.
And I think you're implying that as especially anybody, the most valuable commodity you have is your time. So to just crank on a deal for a very long, long time and eat up cycles that's not really going to land where you want is not a good use of your time. The other point I would make is sometimes you should think about not trying to get a yes, but just starting by trying to get a maybe. I have always said you can't get to from no to yes without starting at maybe. And one of the things that most people are worried about here is losing their job, especially if they have a great, cushy corporate, job. And so the worst thing you can do is stick your neck out. So your starting position is often no. So some people, as an entrepreneur, your starting position is yes, I want to do this. I am excited about doing something. So try and get them to get to maybe and build from there. That's what you want. And to get to maybe, you just got to find something that they like about it enough that you can build off of, as you just said.
That's where the analytics pops in.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone sort of said that, is you find the little thing that you build off of, but get to maybe, and it's a lot easier to get to yes.
I mean, the kinds of projects, how many of you are like indie filmmaker types who have projects you passionately want to make? I mean, maybe you have 10 at most that you really want to make on your plate at the moment. That's your universe of things you're going to be putting forward unless you're hired to do something and you get passionate about that, or you find an 11th and you abandon one. So for us, it's not unusual to work 10 years on a project to get it going. And, if we're passionate about it, we never give up. We go to the thing that's the hottest. I mean, we have enough projects and enough things we're working on that, when one project is cold, we work on the one that's moving forward. But in a way, we're not going to become classical musicians if we're in a rock band. We're not going to pivot to something completely different. We have our kind of repertory of things we want to do and things we love. And, maybe we should have gone to law school like our parents told us, but that's the life we've chosen.
Is there any specific in each of your areas that you would say, this is something you shouldn't really care about because it's bad in the short term, and you really should be looking at these other things because they're better for the long term? For example, if somebody's brand new, not holding out forever to get the highest fee, if you can at least get the project bought and something, a couple episodes or something.
Well, again, I think it depends on where you are in your cycle, right? I mean, if you have multiple things going on, it's a lot easier to say, this is good enough, right? What is this doing for me? Sometimes it's, just paying your rent, right? Like you make a deal that's going to pay you a fee and your back end sucks, which you're never going to see anyway, and that's going to pay your rent, right? So that's a good deal. Sometimes it's you've been struggling for a period of time to get a certain credit and you're willing, you want to go from an EP to a producer in a movie, or you want to be an executive producer in TV and you're willing to take a slightly lower fee for that. So it really depends on what there is or isn't you're trading off on. But again, back to what was said earlier, knowing what you need at that time to further your career. I mean, it's always sort of a little bit, until you get to a certain point, what can you do about this deal that makes the next deal easier that you can live with?
Can you build a relationship? I think a lot of this business is relationships. So if you're trying to get your first project going, I hesitate to say make any deal you can, because that's coming from somebody who sits on the on the studio side more often than not. But it's good to just make a deal that gets you involved and gets you into the system and gets you in a place where you can start building relationships and showing what you've got and what you bring to the party. Because a lot of times you might do some crappy first deal, but as you're working together and the relationship develops, the studio might say, gosh, we have this other project and maybe you'd be right for this. So there are other opportunities that come up. So just getting into the environment. How does that work, though,
if there are multiple parties? For example, with John's latest project, there are multiple parties involved. So how do you...
What does that mean?
You know, there
get
might,
multiple parties, but
Yeah.
what are you asking?
You mean triangulating a
Yes.
deal between? Yeah, it's very difficult sometimes, and one of the elements, not on that deal, but on a similar deal that I will go nameless, the financing party imposed conditions precedent that we really had no control over. I mean, we have control over chain of title, but they wanted to be able to attach some of the talent that was interested as a condition precedent to doing the deal with us. And that can be a very difficult, painful deal because it's now somewhat out of your control. And we've had deals like that we've walked away from because it was taking too long for the other party to make it work for them. We said, look, you know, put on your big boy pants and make the deal with us and take your chances that you're going to be able to make it with the talent. We're not going to wait any longer. We're going to take it somewhere else. If you really love the project, you'll be confident that you'll close the deal or find a substitute. So we try to avoid those deals. I also really try to avoid development deals, to be honest with you, both as a writer and a producer, because they take just as long as a production deal today, I've found. There's much less money in them, needless to say, and they can get sidetracked and they can get weighted down with notes. I often arbitrate for the Writers Guild, which I'm a member of, and when you see all of these drafts by all of these writers and the script isn't necessarily getting better, you know,
It just changes.
that's one of the reasons. They play around with it, and the executives change, and then your property is kind of captured with costs that are very difficult to negotiate to get back in turnaround, which is a key element, by the way, of any deal if you do a kind of development deal, that you're able to acquire the property without costs that you don't know about being attached to it.
Daryl has a fabulous book out called The 16th Minute of Fame, An Insider's Guide for Maintaining Success Beyond 15 Minutes of Fame. What deal-making tips are hidden in that book that you can share with us today?
Are we all getting signed copies?
For a small fee. Oh, no.
And Justin will sing a
Anytime,
song
happily
later.
do it. No, you know, the whole concept behind the 16th minute of fame, absolutely. He just retained me. The whole concept behind the 16th minute of fame is really looking at our business today versus how we kind of all came up yesterday. And if you have the same mentality and you do the same kind of deal making and you fight really hard and you only live, I often say, with one revenue stream like we used to do when I arrived in this town, you can have one deal and one revenue stream. Today, the concept is you've got to do more things because they're making fewer of everything and the revenues don't go as far. And so the idea behind the 16th minute of fame is you have to think differently in the 21st century in order to build a sustainable career. A lot of the things that we've talked about on the panel, you have to have multiple deals. You just can't have that one show you're going to live and die with. You have to think a lot of times money may not be my biggest component. It might be exclusivity. In a landscape where everybody's locked into short orders and they want exclusivity as if they're hiring you for the year round, you have to think beyond, you know, kind of the noun. So
And do your carve-outs.
and carve-outs. I was going to say that's the other big
Carving out
one.
the things you don't want to be exclusive.
Coming in the gate. You know, you often go, do I tell them about this? Well, you better tell them because those paragraphs, you know, 5 pages in might take away your ability to continue to service those other projects. So I believe today you have to create multiple streams of revenue in order to sustain the kind of career or business that you could probably 15 years ago. And if you don't structure your deals in a way where you can render services or do things and create those multiple streams of revenue, you're not going to make it to that 16th minute.
Okay,
thing.
so here's the question for you. In that idea, which is absolutely correct in my opinion, it's very difficult to carve out those things because they're known things, right? Most people at the studio level are going to say, no, you know, we're paying you whatever we're paying you, so you've got to do this. So I have a thesis on this, but I'd like your opinion since I just paid you for the book rights. How does one carve out stuff that is already known by the other person that they typically won't want to give? How can you create your own path outside of it? because they're going to know that you want those things and they're going to immediately say no.
But you can show that.
Asking?
Yeah, well, you can,
yeah,
you
of
can
course.
show, though,
Of
that
course
you
that.
can bring more value. You can bring more value
For
to
example?
them. For example, if I'm bringing a story and I have a relationship with a phenomenal licensing agent who wants to take it out and do the consumer products and merchandising side.
Right.
The studios will do that as an afterthought for the most part. Their first reflex is going to be, no, 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 we're going to keep it. But what in fact you can do is you can bring them the opportunity, and you can say, hey, I can do this faster, better, and I'm going to share the revenue with you. And you're laughing, but
I'm not laughing, I'm disagreeing. It's different.
But
They
this is
wouldn't
something
agree to that. The studio won't. I'm sure.
I have done it.
I know, but I'm saying the position of saying I'm smarter than you, which is an implication of this.
Not smarter.
It is, but I'm faster, I'm better, you're not going to do it as well. Only would work, and I'm sure you found a way around it, because every deal has a loophole. But that works, but that's not an easy spot to be in if you're Warner Brothers and your job is to own all the rights, because it's not only that, they don't want to let you do it, because God forbid this is a giant $100 million movie and they don't control it. That's what they're really worried about. So,
As Fox learned on Star Wars.
as Fox learned on Star Wars.
Yes.
But here's a way you do it. Here's a way you do it sometimes. Again, there's no blanket rule, and so I don't think, we have all unique experiences, and the great art of fun deal making is sometimes you break precedents and you do things that haven't been done before. But this is what I often tell my creators. And we just did this ultimately with a property we sold that we think is going to be a humongous success because we have a humongous star behind it. And even I don't care how big your star is, if Warner Brothers or Fox or one of the big studios want all rights, they're going to try to get all rights. So what we go do is we don't talk about carving it out. We go make a small deal for some ancillary right, and rather than calling the product original, we call it a brand extension of something we've created.
Or derivative.
Whether it is a book, whether it is we did comic books in one situation. We did educational books in another situation.
You
We
could
do
do
a foreign deal in
You could
another
do-
situation.
And you could do a podcast. It costs you nothing to do
Absolutely.
those things.
So the idea of pre-selling or actually creating a smaller deal that is published or in some way in the marketplace gives you a tremendous amount of power when they say they want all rights. And they may say you can carve that little thing out, whatever, and you've got that little thing carved out. They may say we want to buy that little thing you've started. Now you're negotiating for some additional revenue because you have a deal.
That's right.
But the idea I'm advocating is to think differently, embrace the change, understanding that they are going to kind of want it all, and your job is to be 2 steps ahead and figure out how to make sure you keep a little piece or some of the pieces for yourself.
And
It
it's-
used to be as simple as we keep foreign, we sell you domestic, right?
Right.
That was the game for a very, very long time. Now they want foreign because everybody's global in the context of how they're distributing. So the point I think to take away is the creativity and how you can plan, and I'm sticking onto my leverage, how you plan and how you approach the deal making, because I do a lot of front-end thinking, whether I got a big player or a small player, to understand, because I know they're going to want everything, and I know we're going to try to retain as much as we can, because you have to in this climate.
Here's an example just to support you that everybody can relate to. Everyone's heard of probably the Blues Brothers, John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, They had this idea for characters while they were on Saturday Night Live, and I think it was their agent or lawyer that said, if you perform this for the first time on SNL, Lorne Michael will own it, so you should go to a nightclub and do one-night gig, and then you should bring it in. And then they owned it, and that became the House of Blues and a very big empire for Dan Aykroyd. So that's an example way before anybody could create podcasts, but that is exactly what you're talking about, and that's exactly how it worked, and Dan Aykroyd made hundreds of millions of dollars off of that.
The other thing is, other than the large studios, the smaller studios tend to be a lot more flexible in doing this. Warner Brothers, it's virtually impossible unless you really do a lot of front-end thinking, as Daryl is advocating, but some of the other studios that don't have the fully fleshed out departments in everything, they are much more amenable to hearing that you have an opportunity that you can bring to them. It would be their deal, you would still participate in it, but you are bringing that in, so you're retaining some control and a different revenue stream.
I agree, because, at a certain point when you're haggling and, If you say we want to keep the non-educational rights on our film, the educational rights on our film to exhibit in universities, which they'll probably never do, or live stage performance, which they'll probably never do, you know, they'll give it up at that point to close the deal. But, you know, for me, the thing that's the most exciting that's changed in the 3,000 years I've been in this business is the ability to, you know, reach people directly. You know, we would never do a film or a project without doing some kind of crowdfunding related to it. Not just because we want money, but because it's a form of pre-sale that you control, and more importantly even than that is that you're able to create an audience and people who are involved with your content. You know, we did that for the theatrical release of the Philip K. Dick movie that I did. We found the money for it because all the streaming offers we had, you know, after putting years into something, you'd like to see it on a big screen and give it a chance. So, you know, we did that, but the best part of it was we had about 1,000 people around the world who would give out postcards in markets, who would tweet about it, who would post on social media about it. We were able to create a virtual marketing department for ourselves on the film, and also a source of people that we can keep going back to and keep in touch with as a base of fans and a base of investors. So, you know, I think.
How did you do the crowdfunding and get?
Wait, that's another panel.
Well, we did it on Kickstarter, but we've done it on other platforms too.
We're almost out of time because you five are a fabulous font of information. So let's open it up for questions. Does anybody out there have a question, or shall we continue with our conversation?
We've answered everything, haven't we?
Or F.A., did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I want to give an example from music business.
All
Maybe
right.
I thought there are some people interested in the
good.
music
Thank you.
business for deals, because I work in an indie label, and as we talk, like their budget is really limited. So when you go to the deal, like when we're trying to put our artists in a festival or like, you know, famous concerts in LA, and we just get sometimes like, oh, you don't have enough fans. You know, in this situation, you gotta know. And then, yes, you don't need to accept no, and then I may agree, like we really need to find a creative idea. And as an inspirational story, I can share that in that situation, I mean, nowadays technology is so easy. When I talk about data, it's not that always that sophisticated algorithms or something. No, just like look at the radio stations and you could see where's your genre, or like where's your content is consumed. And then based on that, maybe your market is not LA. You can find a different route, and you can start your indie label tour, and then you can get your fan, and then you can come to LA, and you can say,
That
like,
is a good point.
I create this tour myself based on my fans, and you can just go to the limited places where your fans are. So you need to check,
suggestion.
definitely use the data. I mean, maybe I shouldn't call it data, like radio stations informations or social buzz, you know?
Well, thank you. That's great. I can't really see because, oh, there you are. All right, so first I'll do the waving person because she had a more insane wave.
Can you speak louder?
Oh, wait,
Yeah,
I apologize
cannot
for
hear
saying
you.
this. We're almost out of time and we will be kicked out in 5 minutes, so if we can really make our questions short, thank you.
I just want to talk with you after we have a huge fan base in Turkey over some of our products, and I'm not sure what's with that. That's not happening. But my general question is, I was wondering if, you know, this or any other time, this sort of idea of a roundtable where you're discussing different projects, not just, and I realize some of it you can't disclose what you're working on, but in terms of percentages that you guys like to, you know, numbers, fees, from whether it's a universal project or different areas of development, stages of development, and that kind of thing would really help someone like me who, you know, many of us that are really need more of that information, because many of us know what we want, but we sort of don't know as much about the other side.
If you have an experienced lawyer or agent, they'll probably be able to give you
Anybody
guidance.
can help. I mean, even if it was someone you took to lunch and you looked up and said, you know, people will tell you what those things are. That's not a state secret.
All right, the person, the outside.
But now it would translate into doing a podcast first, basically. Is that what you're, like,
Sure.
how do you mitigate maintaining your ownership of your content today?
Well, it's the same exact thing. I mean, you know, the world hasn't changed, right? So whatever you can do to create a precedent that it's something that exists in the real world is A, establishes that you own it. B, this world is filled with a lot of people who are very insecure about their creative decisions, which is why you get so many scripts that get rewritten or reshot or things like that. So anything that has a precedent having been accepted in the marketplace is incredibly valuable, right? So there was a time in which, you know, many years ago, people at CAA were recommending that people write almost a faux book. Like it's a book that is actually just like you take your screenplay for a movie and write it as a book so that you can then, and CAA would then publish it, and then you could say it's a published book, and then you'd go have an auction for book rights to turn it into a movie. So it accomplishes two goals, and it could be anything. It could be a one-woman play that you do. It can be a podcast. It can be a YouTube channel. It's whatever's within your means, but it also lets you, and this is a practical thing besides the negotiation, it lets you test out the material. There's a podcast company called Paracast that just got bought by Spotify. They had only $250,000 in revenue, and it sold for almost $100 million, right? Everybody right now wants exclusive content, so if you can be out there doing things that are super low cost, that allow you to establish that as an existing entity, you're going to be in a much better spot.
Are there any other questions? Oh, yes?
Fantastic panel, thank you guys. We mentor young actors and filmmakers. I have an association, so if you guys could give advice as to what would give them more leverage with their deal making, either putting their content out there through digital or social, or taking it through the film festival circuit.
I think that, everyone has to ask themselves the question of what they want their content to accomplish. And of course, everyone wants it to accomplish everything. They want it to get them their next job, they want to make money, and they want as many people as possible to see it. But those three goals are often in conflict. If you want as many people as possible to see it, put it up on YouTube for free. If you want to get an agent and get a next job, get it into a great festival. If you want to make money, do something that may sell at AFM, but it's probably not going to get you your next job if it's like a low budget horror movie, unless it
YouTube's
takes off.
got a lot of free equipment too if you have enough subscribers.
Pardon?
YouTube has studios and a lot of free top-notch equipment too if you can throw on a couple of subscribers.
Yeah, so you've got to do things. That's the point, is to do things with the resources you have. Make something. Don't wait for somebody else to empower you. It's easier than ever to make a movie, harder than ever to get someone to see it. So make it for as little as possible and make it great. The terrific movie Blue Ruin was funded on Kickstarter. I think it cost about $150,000. It got into Cannes. It established Jeremy Saulnier as a world-class filmmaker, and that's what you've got to do today.
Well, Paranormal cost $10,000, right?
Yeah.
16, very little, and it grossed over $100 million.
Now I would say about that I've seen so many better movies than that at horror festivals that don't have any distribution. So, try to make something that doesn't need $10 million to distribute it. Because as you were saying about people's jobs, the guy who's got the nerve, I'll use that word, to put up $10 million on a $100,000 or $10,000 film, at a studio, that's a guy who probably has a very wealthy, significant other, because he may well lose his or her job.
Well, let's thank our most wonderful panel, even though I'm cutting Linda off. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right.
Very nice to meet you.